Hello. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to use a jeweler's saw. This saw is used to cut sheet metal such as this 22 gauge copper. So if I want to cut a shape out of a piece of copper, I need to use this type of saw in order to remove that excess material. The saw has a couple of different parts. It comes with a handle, the frame, and these thumb screws which help adjust and position the blade correctly. To assemble the saw, you place the saw like this on the edge of a table and use pressure from your body to bend the saw blade slightly. You'll see that the saw is assembled with a thumb screw and a couple pieces of metal. The blade goes in between these two pieces of metal and the thumb screw is tightened down like so to hold the blade in place. I'm going to use a blade, and it's important that the blade points down. So you need to feel with your finger the direction of the saw blade because they're very hard to see in real life. I'm going to position my blade first down here and tighten it, and then I'm going to apply pressure to the saw frame and tighten this end. The blade should be tight. Shouldn't have a lot of flex in the blade. Okay. I like to use either this product here called Burr Life or simple beeswax to help lubricate the blade. It helps take some of the roughness out of the sawing and makes it glide through the metal just a little bit better. I'll just slide it up and down a few times and go from there. The important thing to note when using a jeweler's saw is that it is a finesse process and not a process that takes a lot of force. The most common mistake I see is people holding the saw incorrectly. This is not the correct grip. The way you hold a jeweler's saw is very daintily like this. You want to hold it with just a couple fingers. This allows me to rotate the saw blade almost 180 degrees as I'm cutting. So I can cut and make very nice adjustments to my sawing, cut in any direction that I want. If you hold the saw like this, you only have a limited amount of movement you can make it, and it makes it prone to breaking the blade much easier. To start cutting, I'll hold my saw at about a 45-degree angle and make my initial down pull, and then I'll slowly transition to sawing straight up and down. You'll notice I'm using just two fingers on my saw blade and my thumb to hold it in place, and I'm using very little pressure and just letting the saw do the work. I've used a black marker to draw my lines onto tape and allow myself to cut right along that edge. In order to turn while you are sawing, the blade needs to be in constant motion. So as long as I am moving my saw blade, I can slowly turn and follow curves. If I need to change directions drastically, if I need to make a 90-degree turn, you walk the saw blade in place and turn. I'm not putting any forward pressure at all. I am just simply using my fingers to turn the saw blade while moving it straight up and down, and I can make a complete turn and go in an opposite direction. See, I've cut right along that line there. All right. It is important to note that the blades are very, very fragile, and if while you are cutting you twist the blade like this, or try and turn while you are not moving, you're going to snap the blade and you're going to break a lot of blades doing that. This piece of material here is called a bench pin, and it is very helpful for supporting the metal. I really like these ones with a hole in the middle because they allow me to support thinner pieces of metal like this copper is pretty thin and pretty flexible, so I like to be able to support it while I'm cutting it. And another thing to be careful about when you are sawing is that you don't want to, if you've got a piece of metal that's in your way, you want to saw it off, not bend it up. Bending the metal makes it much more difficult to sand it later on, so you want to try and keep your metal as flat as possible while you're sawing. You always want to saw straight up and down and not at an angle. Sawing straight up and down allows you to cut through the material much faster because you are cutting through much less of the material. Cutting at an angle makes you cut through a much thicker slice of the metal than cutting straight ahead. I'm just developing a steady rhythm. Since I'm close to the edge here, I'm going to cut this little piece off so that it's not in my road and flexing up and down and moving. So it's a good idea to cut little pieces of that off as you go around, especially on a little piece of metal like this, to get those things out of your way. Here I've got a big angle I've got to change, so I'm going to walk the saw in place, just straight up and down, slowly turn, until I get it faced in the direction I want to go, and I can resume sawing. It is very much of a sort of Zen operation. You need to kind of be at one with the saw and kind of feel how it's going. If it's getting a little rough, you can add a little more wax to the blade to help it flow through the metal. Go. The next thing I want to talk about with learning how to use a George saw is how to do a piercing. So in this case, I've got a piece I want to cut out of the middle of this piece of metal. I'm going to use this, which is a little punch, which punches holes in things, and I'm going to line this up in that hole and just twist down on here. It's going to punch a hole in my metal right along my line. And then remove it. So I've got a hole there. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll loosen my saw blade up, feed it through the hole, reattach my blade, and add a little bit more lubrication. And now I'm able to saw the shape on the inside. This is called piercing. I can loosen my saw, and I've got my metal piece cut from there.